sometimes the deepest wounds are inflicted by those who claim to love us the most. I said softly, watching the email notification pop up on everyone's phones around the dinner table. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her device, while my father's expression hardened into something I hadn't seen since that night 10 years ago. Brandon, my husband of 3 years, looked at me with confusion flickering across his face. And Sophia, my younger sister, suddenly went pale. I am Abigail, 27 years old, and this is the story of how I orchestrated the perfect exposure of my husband and sister's betrayal at our family dinner. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, we need to go back 10 years, to the day our family first learned what it truly means to stay together through a crisis. The hospital corridor was too bright, too sterile. I was 17 then, holding Sophia's hand as we waited for news about our mother. Catherine, the pillar of our family, had collapsed during Sunday breakfast. The doctor's words came in fragments: chronic condition, long-term care, family support crucial. I watched my 14-year-old sister's face crumple, while our father, William, stood there like a statue, his IT security manual forgotten on the waiting room chair. That day marked the beginning of our family's transformation. Mom's illness became the gravitational force around which we all orbited. Dad worked remotely to be near her. I postponed college for a year to help at home. Sophia, usually rebellious and distant, suddenly became the perfect daughter, trying to compensate for Mom's inability to manage household tasks. We became closer than ever, bound by the shared purpose of keeping our family intact. Your mother needs stability, Dad told us one evening, his eyes reflecting the blue light of his laptop screen. We can't let her worry about anything. Those words became our family motto, though I never imagined they would one day be used against me. 10 years later, I found myself living what seemed like a perfect life. Following in my father's footsteps, I had built a career in IT security. Brandon, a pediatrician I met at a hospital fundraiser, became my husband. When Sophia moved back home after another failed attempt at finding herself in a different city, it seemed natural to offer her our guest room. After all, we were the picture-perfect family, the successful elder sister, her doctor husband, and the artistic younger sister, all living together while caring for their recovering mother. The first cracks appeared subtly. A lingering touch here, a private joke there. Brandon working late shifts that didn't match the hospital schedule. Sophia's art gallery hours mysteriously aligning with Brandon's free time. I noticed but dismissed these signs, attributing them to my professional paranoia. In my line of work, seeing patterns in seemingly random data was second nature. "You're doing that thing again," Brandon would say, smiling indulgently whenever I questioned his schedule changes. "Not everything is a security breach, honey." His words were meant to be reassuring, but they carried a patronizing edge that made something twist in my stomach. The actual discovery came during a routine backup of our home network. A simple task that I'd done countless times before. But this time, a misrouted email thread appeared on my screen. The subject line was innocent enough: gallery opening. The content was anything but. "I can't stop thinking about last night," Sophia had written. "We need to be more careful though. Abby's been asking questions." Brandon's reply came an hour later: "Don't worry. She's too busy with her mother's appointments to notice anything. Besides, she trusts us completely." I sat there, staring at the screen, my security analyst's mind automatically cataloging details, timestamps, email headers, IP addresses. But beneath the professional detachment, a cold fury was building. They weren't just having an affair, they were using my devotion to my family as cover for their betrayal. That night, as I lay awake beside Brandon, listening to his peaceful breathing, I made my decision. If they wanted to use my family's trust against me, I would use my professional skills to expose their deception. But not immediately. Not in a way they could deny or explain away. I would gather evidence, build an irrefutable case, and when the time came, I would reveal everything in a way that would leave no room for manipulation or denial. "Abby." Mom's voice brought me back to the present, to the dinner table where my carefully orchestrated revelation was about to unfold. "What emails are you talking about, dear?" I smiled, the expression feeling both foreign and perfectly natural on my face. "I believe everyone should read them for themselves," I replied, my voice steady. After all, some stories are better understood when you have all the evidence in front of you. As phones lit up around the table, I watched Brandon's confident smile begin to falter. Sophia's hand, reaching for her device, trembled slightly. And in that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. The truth, as they say, will set you free. But first, it needs to be delivered in a way that no one can deny. My father caught my eye across the table, and I saw in his expression the same determination I'd witnessed during Mom's darkest days in the hospital. He knew, without reading a single word, that whatever was in those emails, his eldest daughter had made sure it was bulletproof. After all, I was his student in more ways than one. The sound of notifications continued to chime around the table, like a digital orchestration of the moment everything would change. I took a sip of my water, waiting for the inevitable explosion that would follow. Some might call this revenge, but I preferred to think of it as restoration, the restoration of truth in a web of lies that had threatened to suffocate my family. The time for secrets was over. The time for truth had begun. The systematic gathering of evidence was a familiar process to me, but documenting my own family's betrayal felt surreal. Each discovery was like a small knife twisting in my heart, made worse by the continuing charade of normal family life we maintained. "I've picked up Mom's new prescriptions," Sophia announced one evening, her voice carrying that artificial cheerfulness she perfected lately. "And I got those art supplies I needed. The store was having a sale." I nodded, noting how she avoided eye contact while placing the pharmacy bag on the counter. Later, when reviewing the credit card statements, I found charges from a boutique hotel during those same hours. The art supply store receipt had been carefully manufactured, a skill my sister had apparently developed alongside her other deceptions. The family dynamics shifted subtly but significantly. Our Sunday dinners, once a warm tradition, became exercises in contained tension. Mom, still fragile from her latest health scare, would watch us with worried eyes as Brandon and Sophia exchanged glances they thought were subtle. Dad, more perceptive than they realized, began asking pointed questions about their respective schedules. "Interesting hours for a pediatrician," he commented one evening, his security expert's mind clearly picking up the same patterns I had noticed. "Hospital administration must be quite different from when I was consulting there." Brandon's response was smooth, practiced. "Healthcare is evolving, William. We're implementing new patient care protocols that require irregular hours." The lie rolled off his tongue with disturbing ease. My mother's condition became their unwitting shield. Whenever I raised questions about their whereabouts or inconsistencies in their stories, they would deflect with concerns about Mom's health. "Are you sure you're not just stressed about your mother?" Brandon would ask, his voice dripping with manufactured concern. "Maybe you should focus more on her care instead of working so late." The irony was bitter, they were using my devotion to my family as a weapon against me. The evidence mounted steadily. Security camera footage from their favorite meeting spots. Bank statements showing duplicate expenses. Messages intercepted through our home network. But the most damning revelations came from their own careless confidence. One night, I accessed Brandon's cloud storage, a simple task given that he still used our wedding date as his password. There, I found a folder of photos, Brandon and Sophia at various locations, their intimacy obvious and intentional. The timestamps aligned perfectly with his supposed hospital shifts and her gallery events. "We should tell her after Mom's next checkup," Sophia had written in a message. "She'll be too focused on the medical stuff to make a scene." Brandon's reply was equally callous, "Agreed. Besides, she's been so caught up in her work lately, she probably won't even be surprised. We can paint it as a natural drift apart." Their plans for my life, my emotions, my reactions, all laid out like a clinical procedure. They'd even discussed how to handle the family fallout, with Sophia suggesting they could help Mom understand by emphasizing how work had changed me. The betrayal went beyond their affair. They were actively working to isolate me, to cast me as the cold, career-focused wife who had driven her husband away and the emotionally distant sister who had lost touch with family priorities. Dad was the first to directly confront me about his suspicions. "Something's not right with those two," he said during one of our private coffee meetings, a tradition we'd maintained since my tech security training days. "Your mother doesn't see it because she doesn't want to, but I've noticed the patterns." I considered confiding in him then, showing him the evidence I'd gathered. But the investigator in me knew it wasn't time yet. The case wasn't complete. Tell me something, he continued, his eyes sharp behind his reading glasses. Are you documenting everything? The question made me smile despite myself. Like father, like daughter. Every bite, I confirmed. He nodded, satisfied. Good. When you're ready to move, make it decisive. No half measures. The opportunity for that decisive move presented itself sooner than expected. Mom's birthday was approaching, and as usual, the family would gather for dinner. Brandon and Sophia had grown bolder, less careful. Perhaps they thought my silence meant acceptance or obliviousness. They began leaving more obvious traces: joint rideshare accounts, shared online calendars poorly disguised as work scheduling tools, even a joint credit card I discovered during a routine network security scan. What they didn't realize was that their growing carelessness only made my case stronger. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of their deception. The final straw came during what should have been a routine family gathering. Mom had experienced a minor health scare, nothing serious, but enough to remind us all of her vulnerability. As we gathered in the hospital waiting room, I watched Brandon comfort Sophia with an intimacy that went far beyond brother-in-law and sister-in-law. Their hands lingered too long, their whispered conversations too private. That evening, reviewing the hospital's security footage, accessing it was embarrassingly easy for someone with my skills, I found them in an empty corridor, sharing a moment they thought was private. The timestamp matched exactly with when they claimed to be picking up Mom's prescriptions. Soon, Brandon had whispered to Sophia, their foreheads touching. We'll tell her soon, and then we won't have to hide anymore. The timing of Mom's birthday dinner suddenly seemed perfect. They wanted a revelation? They would have one, just not the one they had planned. I spent the next week preparing meticulously. Every email was crafted to its specific recipient. For Mom, evidence of how they had used her illness as cover. For Dad, proof of financial deceptions including unauthorized access to his retirement planning documents. For our extended family, a carefully curated timeline of lies and manipulations. The night before the dinner, I sat in my home office, surrounded by multiple monitors displaying the digital trail of their betrayal. In one window, their private messages plotting their reveal. In another, my own carefully prepared counterstrike. The symmetry would have been beautiful if it weren't so heartbreaking. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophia, "Don't forget to pick up Mom's favorite cake for tomorrow." The casual audacity of it, the pretense of sisterly cooperation, made something harden inside me. Tomorrow, the masks would fall. Tomorrow, the truth would shatter their carefully constructed fiction. As I prepared for bed, Brandon kissed my cheek as usual. "Big day tomorrow," he said, his voice warm with false affection. "Mom's going to love having everyone together." Yes, I agreed, thinking of the emails scheduled to deploy during dinner. It'll certainly be memorable. I lay awake that night, listening to Brandon's steady breathing beside me, remembering all the nights I'd found comfort in that sound. Now it was just a reminder of every lie, every betrayal, every moment of manipulation. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The stage was set, the players were in position, and unlike them, I had made sure my performance would be flawless. My mother's birthday dinner began like a perfectly choreographed performance. The table was set with her favorite china, candles flickered in the dimming evening light, and the aroma of her beloved pot roast filled the air. Every detail was perfect, because this wasn't just a birthday celebration. This was the stage for my carefully orchestrated revelation. Family members arrived in their usual order, Aunt Patricia with her signature casserole, Uncle James adjusting his bow tie, my cousins with their carefully wrapped presents. Mom sat at the head of the table, looking stronger than she had in weeks, while Dad hovered protectively nearby. Brandon and Sophia arrived together, claiming they'd both been delayed at work. I noted how they deliberately sat across from each other rather than side by side, their final attempt at discretion. "Before we start," Brandon announced, standing with his wine glass. His confident smile made my stomach turn. "I have something important to share with everyone." I watched him with clinical detachment, noting how his hand slightly trembled, not from nervousness, but from anticipation. Beside him, Sophia fidgeted with her napkin, her eyes darting between Brandon and me. Abigail and I are getting divorced, he continued, his voice carrying that practiced sympathetic tone he used with difficult patients. I hadn't planned to announce it this way, but since everyone's together. He paused, reaching across the table to take Sophia's hand. There's more. Sophia and I have fallen in love. We've been trying to fight it, but sometimes love chooses you. The shocked silence that followed was broken only by my mother's whispered, "Oh my God." All eyes turned to me, awaiting the inevitable breakdown, tears, screaming, perhaps the throwing of my mother's good china. Instead, I nodded calmly and said, "Please, everyone, check your emails right now." What? Brandon asked, confusion flickering across his face. What emails? I sent them just before dinner, I replied, pulling out my own phone. Everyone should have received them by now. Around the table, family members hesitantly reached for their phones. My cousin David was the first to open his email, his eyes widening as he scrolled through the contents. My mother followed, her hand flying to her mouth as she gasped for the second time that evening. What have you done? Sophia hissed, her face paling as she grabbed her own phone. Evidence, I replied calmly, taking a sip of water. Let's start with the timeline, shall we? 2 years of deception, meticulously documented with timestamps, locations, and photographic evidence. Dad, you might find the financial analysis particularly interesting, it's on page 3. Brandon attempted to maintain control. These are private communications. Private? I cut him off. Like the private conversations about using mom's illness as cover for your meetings? Should I play the recording from the hospital corridor last week? My mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Dad immediately moved closer to her, his protective instinct kicking in. Or perhaps, I continued, standing now, we should discuss your elaborate plans to paint me as the cold, career-obsessed wife? The messages where you plotted how to help everyone understand why you had to betray me. Sophia burst into tears, her signature move when cornered. It wasn't like that. We never meant to get caught. I finished for her. Let me read from your messages. She'll be too focused on mom's checkup to make a scene. That's what you wrote, Sophia. How long have you been using our mother's illness to facilitate your affair? The silence that followed was absolute. Even Sophia's sobs stopped as the weight of my words sank in. I've prepared individual reports for each of you, I announced, my voice carrying across the stunned silence. Each one details how their deception directly affected you. Mom, yours focuses on how they used your medical appointments as cover. Dad, yours includes their unauthorized access to your retirement planning documents. And Patricia, you'll find details about the times they used your beach house while claiming to be at medical conferences. The systematic dismantling of their deception continued relentlessly. Each piece of evidence was presented with meticulous precision, each lie exposed with irrefutable proof. Family members shifted from shock to anger to disgust as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. The joint credit card you thought I wouldn't find, I continued. The hotel charges disguised as art supplies. The money transferred from our joint savings, yes, Brandon, I found that too. The fake gallery events, the fabricated hospital shifts, every single lie you used to manipulate not just me, but our entire family. It's all there, documented and cross-referenced. Brandon's professional facade finally cracked. You had no right to. To what? My father's voice thundered across the table. To expose how you and Sophia manipulated my wife's illness? Used our family's trust? Abigail has done exactly what she should have done. My mother, who had been quietly weeping, suddenly straightened in her chair. All those times you offered to take me to appointments, she said to Sophia, her voice trembling with anger rather than weakness. You were using my condition to meet Brandon, I finished softly. Yes, Mom. They were using your medical appointments as their cover story. Sophia attempted one final defense. We fell in love. You can't control who you love. No, I agreed, but you can control how you act on it. You chose to deceive. You chose to manipulate. You chose to use our mother's illness as your shield. I turned to the rest of the family. And now, you can all choose how to respond to the truth. The ensuing chaos was almost theatrical. Aunt Patricia demanded they leave immediately. Uncle James began calculating the money they'd swindled from various family members. Cousins who had defended their suspicious behavior now sat in stunned silence. Through it all, I remained calm, answering questions, clarifying details, providing additional evidence as needed. My father's proud nod told me everything I needed to know. The student had indeed become the master. "I've also prepared a final document," I announced as the initial storm began to settle. "A complete record of everything, including your plans to blame your betrayal on my supposed emotional distance and career focus. It's being sent to our entire extended family, close friends, and selected professional contacts right now." As phones began chiming throughout the house, and presumably across our social network, I stood up. "Mom, I'm sorry this had to happen on your birthday. You deserved better." I kissed her cheek, noting how she clutched my hand with newfound strength. "Where are you going?" Brandon called out, his voice holding a note of panic I'd never heard before. I turned at the door, surveying the scene one last time. "Home," I replied simply. "To begin divorce proceedings." "Oh, and Sophia? You might want to update your resume. I hear the art gallery board received some interesting information about certain financial discrepancies." As I walked to my car, I heard the continued chaos erupting behind me. But for the first time in months, I felt at peace. The truth had been revealed, the masks had fallen, and the path to my new life lay clear before me. My phone buzzed, a message from Dad, flawless execution. "Just like I taught you." I smiled, starting the engine. Indeed, some lessons about protecting yourself and exposing deception had been passed down perfectly from father to daughter. And tonight, those lessons had helped restore truth to a family built on lies. The aftermath of my revelation unfolded like a perfectly executed chess game. Each piece fell exactly where I had anticipated, and the consequences rippled through every aspect of Brandon and Sophia's carefully constructed lives. Within a week, Brandon was summoned to the hospital ethics committee. My evidence packet included documentation of how he had manipulated his work schedules to facilitate the affair, potentially compromising patient care. His attempts to explain away the discrepancies only made things worse, especially when I released the recording of him bragging to Sophia about falsifying medical records to cover their meetings. "Your position here requires absolute trust," the committee chair informed him. "This systematic pattern of deception raises serious concerns about your judgment." Brandon's medical license wasn't revoked, but his prestigious position at the children's hospital was. He was relegated to a small clinic in another state, his reputation in the medical community irreparably damaged. Sophia's downfall was equally spectacular. The art gallery's board of directors received anonymous tips about financial irregularities, nothing illegal, but enough questionable decisions to warrant an audit. When they discovered she had been using gallery events as cover for her affair, often charging personal expenses to the gallery's accounts, they terminated her immediately. But the real surprise came 3 days after the dinner, when my father called me to his home office. "There's something you need to see," he said, pulling up a series of encrypted files on his computer. "I did some digging after your revelation, following patterns I noticed in their financial records." What he showed me made my blood run cold. Brandon and Sophia hadn't just been planning to leave me, they had been systematically draining my family's resources. Dad had discovered unauthorized access attempts to not just his retirement accounts, but to Mom's medical trust fund as well. "They were playing a longer game than we realized," Dad explained, his security expertise evident in the detailed analysis he presented. "They were setting up a financial safety net using our family's money." I felt a new wave of cold fury wash over me. Using Mom's illness was one thing, but attempting to steal the money meant for her care? That crossed a line I hadn't even imagined existed. "What do you want to do?" Dad asked, his eyes meeting mine with the same steely determination I felt. My response was immediate: everything. The next phase of consequences hit them like a tsunami. Dad's connections in the financial security world meant that their attempts to access family accounts were flagged as potential fraud. Their joint credit accounts were frozen. The small fortune they had tried to hide away was traced and reclaimed. But the masterstroke came from an unexpected source: my mother. After learning about their attempt to steal from her medical fund, she transformed from a victim into an avenging angel. I've spent years feeling guilty about my illness burdening this family, she announced during an emergency family meeting. No more. I'm adding my voice to Abigail's evidence, and I'm telling everyone exactly how they used my condition for their affair. Her public statement, combined with my evidence, destroyed any remaining sympathy anyone might have had for Brandon and Sophia. They weren't just adulterers anymore, they were predators who had tried to steal from a sick woman. 6 months later, I stood in my new corner office, looking out over the city skyline. My exposure of the financial scheme had caught the attention of a major cybersecurity firm, earning me a promotion and a significant career advancement. The divorce was finalized in record time, with the judge being particularly unimpressed by Brandon's attempts to claim a share of our joint assets after the evidence of his financial manipulations came to light. Brandon's fall from grace had been spectacular. The Hospital Ethics Committee's investigation had revealed more than just schedule manipulation, they found patterns of negligence during the hours he was secretly meeting Sophia. His medical license was suspended pending review, and his reputation in the medical community was irreparably damaged. Last I heard, he was working as a medical consultant for a small insurance company, his dreams of being a renowned pediatric surgeon shattered forever. His recent attempt to join a prestigious private practice had ended before it began when they discovered the digital trail of his misconduct that I had made sure would follow him forever. Sophia hadn't fared any better. After the gallery fired her, the art world's tight-knit community had completely frozen her out. Her attempts to start over in neighboring cities were met with closed doors. Apparently, news of how she had manipulated gallery funds and betrayed her own family had spread through professional networks like wildfire. She had tried reaching out to me through mutual friends, claiming she was truly sorry, and had learned her lesson, but her words rang hollow when I discovered she was simultaneously trying to sell her story to local media outlets. The reporters, armed with the full evidence I had provided, turned her attempted redemption narrative into an even more damaging exposé of her manipulative behavior. The last update I received about them was almost poetic. They had broken up spectacularly at a small diner, with Sophia screaming about Brandon's new online dating profile and Brandon accusing her of using him for money he no longer had. The witness accounts on social media had been particularly satisfying to read. Mom's health had improved dramatically once the stress of their deception was removed. She and Dad had grown closer than ever, their bond strengthened by the crisis we had weathered together. The last attempt at contact from Sophia, a tearful voicemail about missing Mom's cooking, was met with my mother's steely response, "The only thing I'm cooking is evidence for the financial investigation." The sound of my office door opening drew my attention. "Ms. Foster? Your 4 o'clock is here," my assistant announced. I smiled, checking my reflection in the window. The woman who looked back at me wasn't a victim, she was a survivor, stronger and more successful than ever. In fact, the consulting firm I had started on the side, specializing in detecting digital deception in personal relationships, was already gaining national attention. "Send them in," I replied, turning to face my next challenge. Life had taught me that betrayal doesn't break you, it reveals what you're truly capable of. My phone buzzed with a message from Dad, "Dinner tonight? Mom's feeling great, and she's cooking your favorite." I typed back a quick, "Wouldn't miss it," feeling a warmth spread through my chest. Some might call what I did revenge, but I saw it differently. I had protected my family, exposed the truth, and emerged stronger than ever. The best revenge, after all, isn't just success, it's thriving in ways your enemies never imagined possible. That evening, as I sat with my parents, enjoying Mom's signature pot roast and sharing stories about my latest work projects, I felt a profound sense of peace. The family portrait on the wall now showed only the 3 of us, but our smiles were genuine, our bond stronger than ever. The latest update on Brandon and Sophia's downward spiral, they were now fighting over who would repay the legal fees, only confirmed what we already knew: karma, when properly guided, could be spectacular. "You know," Mom said, serving me an extra helping of roasted vegetables, "sometimes I think we should thank them." "Thank them?" I asked, surprised. She nodded, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "If they hadn't shown their true colors, we wouldn't have discovered how strong we really are. And you, my dear, wouldn't be the powerhouse you've become." Dad raised his glass in a toast. "To the truth, and to those who have the courage to expose it." I clinked my glass against theirs, smiling. He was right. The truth hadn't just set me free, it had launched me into a future brighter than anything I could have imagined when I was living in the shadow of lies. Later that night, as I drove home to my new luxury apartment, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was confident, successful, and unafraid. Brandon and Sophia had thought they were writing the end of my story. Instead, they had only written the end of their own, while I was just beginning my most exciting chapter. My phone chimed with a calendar reminder, tomorrow's board meeting, where I would present my new security protocol, one inspired by my personal experience with detecting deception. Life had given me lemons, and I had made not just lemonade, but an entire empire. And somewhere out there, Brandon and Sophia were still trying to explain away their past, not realizing that in the digital age, some stains never wash out. The city lights sparkled before me as I drove home, each one a reminder of the opportunities that lay ahead. They had tried to break me, but instead, they had unleashed my true potential. And that, perhaps, was the sweetest victory of all, knowing that while they spiraled downward together, I was soaring higher than ever before.